All right, what's up, heathens? How y'all doing? So today I have Jon Perry here with me from Stated Clearly, which if you guys haven't checked out Stated Clearly, he's got a lot of great videos discussing evolution in a very easy to understand way. And so if you haven't subscribed to him yet, which I don't know why you wouldn't have, but go on ahead, go on over there, check out his videos. You just recently had a video get pretty popular, right? It was on the topic that we're
Right,
discussing tonight.
right. Yeah. Where do new viruses come from? Is the animation that just ended up, well, it went viral. The best way to make a viral video is to make a video on a virus, I suppose. So, uh, so yeah, it's doing really well. I think it's in my top 3 videos right now. Um,
Awesome.
so yeah, I'm pretty happy with that.
That's good. So now, the first question I want to ask you about is how are you doing?
Great, great. I'm weathering the coronavirus by mostly staying home. Unfortunately, my wife is a nurse, so she's going out into the craziness of it every day. But it hasn't hit here very hard yet. We're in Montreal, but it's scheduled to probably by Friday
Oh,
be pretty
really?
bad here, and she'll start to have to do 12-hour shifts and stuff. So yeah, it's so far it's chill, but it's gonna get pretty crazy here in the future.
Oh, really? Well, I really do appreciate your wife, doing the job that she does. I know everybody's pretty much thanking the medical community right now, and I mean,
Right.
I don't know any nurses personally, but I think that they're all very important, and I really appreciate them doing their jobs. So,
Ah,
um,
thanks.
yeah.
Yeah,
So,
I
go
would I
ahead.
would say I would say nurses, and then like just gas station attendants and stuff. People are putting themselves at risk to go to work. It is pretty crazy to see, but
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, without maintaining like grocery stores being open and gas stations and everything. I mean, I think things would be a lot worse as far as like just general uh society goes. Like
oh yeah.
I think it'd be a lot worse. But
Yeah,
in any case, so let's go on ahead and get on into our
yeah.
topic tonight. So we're going to be discussing the coronavirus, its evolution, and some of the finer points around viruses in general. So,
Mhm.
John, do you want to start off like I guess talking about how viruses are a little different than other organisms?
Yeah, so you probably heard this debate in biology as to whether or not a virus is alive, and that's pretty common. People like to discuss this. Viruses are the simplest organisms that humans generally have to worry about. There are some things that we might consider to be organisms that are simpler. Some people you might want to consider a plasmid to be an organism, which is a chunk of DNA that's inside bacteria that can jump from one bacteria to another. There are infectious agents like prions and jumping genes that can hop from one mammal to another. But in general, viruses are the smallest, simplest organisms that we really have to worry about. So there's, a typical virus you can fit about 1,000 of them or so, or several hundred inside of a bacteria. So they're tiny. They're tiny, tiny organisms, and that's kind of like the layman's explanation of what a virus is. But biologically, the big difference between a virus and a bacteria, for example, is that viruses do not have ribosomes, and the ribosome is the structure inside the cell. You actually have lots of ribosomes in each one of your cells that reads the information in your genes and converts that into protein. So a virus cannot do that. It cannot build its own protein. It does have genes, and those genes do code for protein, but it can't make that protein on its own. It has to infect a cell and hijack its ribosome in order to make copies of itself. So viruses are obligate parasites. They have to infect a cell, and they cannot form their own ribosome. And so that's how biologists think about them.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. And I guess this is kind of what causes all the symptoms that we experience whenever we get a particular virus. It's what causes the fever and all this other stuff is the replicating and just general infection. Um,
Yeah.
where did the first viruses come from?
So there's actually debate about this. There are three main ideas about where viruses first came from, uh, and probably it's possible that all three of these are true because there's huge diversity of viruses. There are more virus species than there are any other species combined. Uh, there's lots of different kinds of viruses. It's possible that viruses are their own branch of the evolutionary tree that split off at the very early moments in the origin of life. So, as the first bacteria and archaea and eukaryotes were evolving, viruses were their own fourth thing, their own, thing that was evolving alongside them. And maybe it's true that some viruses alive today still actually can trace their lineages all the way back to the origin of life, but that's the least likely. The second uh, idea about how viruses came about is that they are escaped genes. So I talked about plasmids in bacteria, and I talked about jumping genes in animals. There are lots of these genes that can actually hop from one organism to another. So if a tick is biting you, it's possible for jumping genes in that tick, if any of its cells rip open, some of those jumping genes can actually get into your cells that are also ripped open, and they can end up getting incorporated into your genome. And it's possible that a virus is just something like that also evolved the ability to survive outside the body for a period of time to cover itself in proteins that would protect it so it can actually transfer from one organism to another. And then the third possibility for the origin of viruses, which is probably where most viruses come from. Like I said, it's possible that we have viruses that can trace their lineages all the way back to the origin of life. But the third possibility is that viruses are just extremely atrophied parasites. So when an organism becomes a parasite, when it goes from a free living organism to a parasite is something that basically lives off one other host organism throughout a major part of its life cycle. So a tapeworm is a parasite. Um, most bacteria are parasites, and so on. When you become a parasite, you don't need a bunch of stuff that you would need to be a free living organism, and so those organs start to atrophy, and over evolutionary time, and you could hypothetically lose even your ribosome because you just don't need it. You're always inside of a host. Why build your own when you can take from your host, right? So it's very likely that those second two options that most viruses we know of come from those last two options. Unfortunately, we cannot follow viruses through the fossil record because they're just so small and so fragile that they deteriorate before they leave a trace in the fossil record. But yeah, those are our thoughts, the three possibilities there. And yeah, we see it sounds kind of strange that a free living organism might become simpler over evolutionary time because we typically think of evolution as making things that are more and more complex as time goes on. But evolution is not directional. It can go either way. There are human cancers that we have in laboratories that we were studying in laboratories that have become their own organisms because they can actually infect other laboratory equipment and be transmitted to other laboratories and so on. There are cancers in dogs that can actually pass from one dog to another. So essentially it's a single-celled organism whose ancestor was a dog. So this actually happens all the time in evolution. You can evolve either way, more complex, less complex. There's no rules.
Well, so that was going to be my next thing is how or why do viruses evolve over time? Because we just talked about how they came into existence, but I'm wondering how do they change like over time?
Yeah. So as I mentioned earlier, there are more virus species than there are any other organism. But the vast majority do not infect humans. There's only a few of them. I mean, if you, off the top of my head, I could probably only name like 12 or so. But the the viruses that exist, they all specialize in being parasites on one particular type of host. They're so simple that, if you take a virus from a plant, for example, and put it in a human cell, it would not have the proteins needed to do anything to a human cell. It's such a foreign environment. A human cell versus a plant cell, it's such a foreign environment. And actually, the difference between a human cell and a dog cell is significantly different from a chemical perspective. And these things are so small that the world they live in is just chemicals, right? And you can kind of think of the difference between a bat's cell and a human cell as the difference between the sea and the land. It's a big transition to go from one to the other for a virus. It's a big deal to move from one species to another. But if you have two animals that are different from each other but are in constant contact with each other and are constantly producing viruses, these viruses are constantly mutating, as just like everything mutates when it reproduces. And every once in a while, you will get a mutation that makes a virus less good at living in its normal host, but just so happens to also make it more good at living in a different host. And when animals are interacting with other species on a regular basis, this gives an environment kind of like the coastline, where organisms can sort of evolve to live between the two hosts and then eventually jump to a new host and stay there for good. So we have, if you go to the beach, you'll find like hermit crabs, for example. There are hermit crabs that live on the beach that can live in the ocean and can live on the beach. There are other species of hermit crab that can only live on the land. They'll actually drown if they go in the water. And then, of course, there are hermit crabs that are fully marine, and that's actually where hermit crabs started out, is in the ocean. So when two organisms are living really close to each other for a long period of time, they kind of act like this beach environment where the virus can transfer from one ecosystem into another ecosystem really quite smoothly. And the meat industry in China has been particularly good for that because they keep lots of different species together in small areas. And the meat industry here in the United States has been a good environment for that too. The swine flu, which was the last pandemic that we had, it wasn't nearly as catastrophic as this one, but that was caused by the growing pork. It was the pork industry that caused that. So you have humans interacting with pigs over long periods of time, and every once in a while, these weird mutants will find their way into a human, and will find that they actually can sort of infect that human. And then once that happens, small mutations, beneficial mutations, can accumulate in that virus's lineage, making it better and better at infecting humans until it starts a pandemic, until it can easily be transmitted from one human to another. And that's what happened with the swine flu. That's what's happened here with COVID-19, and it's going to continue to happen in the future. It's just a part of life. It's happened forever. It will happen forever.
Yeah, so that brings me to my next question: is where exactly did COVID-19 originate? And I mean, I think that I know, but would be a good time to find out from somebody that would actually know.
Yeah. So there are lots of possibilities now for the origin of viruses that are not natural. And if you get online, you'll see a lot of people there's these conspiracy theories that it's a bioweapon or that it was created in a lab. Scientists were studying it and it somehow got out. And these are actually legitimate concerns. They're not total tinfoil hat like level conspiracy theories. We really do know how to take a virus from an animal, mutate it in the lab, and use it as a weapon. The U.S. used to be doing this, possibly still is. China, Russia, all of these big nations have had bioweapons programs where they were messing with viruses and trying to make them ideal weapons. And some of those weapons would be for, causing deaths in a local area. Some would be for crippling economies and so on. There's limited uses for a bioweapon like that. So that actually was a legitimate concern for the U.S. military and for other militaries around the world when this virus first broke out. They wanted to know if it was a bioweapon. Uh, the other possibility, non-natural possibility, is that it was genetically modified in a lab just for the sake of research. So in laboratories, when we're studying viruses, if we want to study a virus that's infecting bats, bats are hard to keep alive in a laboratory setting. They're hard to handle. So we will mutate it so that it works in mice. So we're really good at doing this. We know how to do it. We've been doing it for a long time. And we also do have the technology to mutate something so it works in humans. And there are reasons that for studying viruses, if there's a virus that looks like it might jump to humans soon, it's actually good for researchers in a very, very well-controlled lab setting to see what would happen if it did. And so there actually are mutation experiments where we take a virus and we mutate it so it works on human cells, just so that we can study how it works. And so when this virus first came out, there was those two concerns. This might be a bioweapon, this might be a lab leak. At this point, we now the genome of this new virus has been scrutinized by scientists all around the world at many different labs to see if it has signs of genetic engineering, and they have not been able to find any. And so what that tells us is that this is most likely a natural evolution event. And we think that it happened in the meat market in China. So in China, they have these things called wet markets, where they take animals from all around the world. Actually, they have all kinds of different species, and they'll sell them to people who either want to buy them alive and then they'll take them at home for food, or they'll have them slaughtered there at the meat market. And this is it's like the perfect environment for these mutations to occur, for these what we call spillover events, when a virus jumps from one species to another. It's like the beach for things evolving onto land, right? Because you've got all these animals together, their body fluids are being mixed together, and so on. So we think that either a worker at this market in Wuhan, China, either was working with animals in his own, breeding animals, and first got this disease and then brought it to his clients on accident when he went to work at the market, or it could have actually evolved in the market itself. But it spread very rapidly, and we could not contain it. We failed to contain it, and this is the result.
Yeah, which there was actually a question that kind of directly relates to that, as to whether or not a patient zero has been found. I assume that there's no real way to determine a patient zero in this case, right?
You could. It's really hard to find a true patient zero. Every time we say that we found patient zero, it's very rarely the true patient zero. Like that word came about through the HIV epidemic, and patient zero was actually a guy from Montreal, who got assigned patient zero, and he was a flight attendant, and he was very sexually active, and he got the disease from someone who originally got it from Africa, and this guy spread it to like 300 other people. He was very sexually active, and so what we do is we do these contact tracing. So when people start getting sick, we try and figure out, who do you know, who did you have contact with, and we can trace it back as far as we possibly can. We haven't been able to trace it back to one person in this case, and there's also, I mean, talk about doxing somebody. It's actually kind of dangerous to do this if it gets out publicly who patient zero was. That person's got hell to pay, right? It's going to be a million people knocking at his door, angry at him. So in the case of patient zero with HIV, this French Canadian guy, he really wasn't the true patient zero. It was years earlier, and an unknown group of people, probably people who were hunting chimps, maybe scientists that were working with chimps, that first got HIV. And the same is true with this. It's really hard to tell who the true first person was, because what happens when a virus first jumps over into a new species, it's not very good at infecting and being transmitted. It's our bodies are so much different than the original host. And in this case, we think that it came either from bats or from pangolins. A pangolin is this, I'm not saying penguin, I'm saying pangolin, which is this anteater looking thing with scales. Those animals are used really commonly in Chinese medicine as meat, and then their blood is also used in rituals when a new building is being constructed in certain cultures in China. And so there's a lot of human contact with pangolins, and we find a lot of coronaviruses in pangolins, and one of them is very similar to this new one. So it could have jumped into humans working with pangolins. It could have jumped into hunters. I mean, these are, pangolins are poached for the most part, and so the people that work with them don't, like keep good records of. There's not government records of these people, and it's hard to contact them. A lot of times they're really poor, so they don't have cell phones. You can't trace who had contact with who. So it does get extremely difficult to find the origin in a case like this. But the market in Wuhan is where it first really spread. So that's, we think it existed in humans several months before the big first spreading, but that's the Wuhan market is our closest thing to patient zero.
Okay. Now, something that I know both KC and I have been curious about is how is this virus a lot different than H1N1? Because with H1N1 we hear about how, what was it, 60 million people were infected and there were so many thousands of deaths associated with it, and we didn't really have this big of a pandemic. So what's the big difference between those two different viruses?
Yeah, it's so the flu. So H1N1 is now the flu. So the catastrophe in, what was it, 1819, right?
Or
The
1918, I think.
or yeah,
The Spanish
1918.
flu. Yeah.
Yeah. So the Spanish flu, the H1N1, the first big breakout of the flu was absolutely catastrophic. And for some reason, and it's actually not fully understood why, it was killing mostly young people. And it was triggering the immune system to go haywire, and the immune system would attack the lungs. So you were getting kind of like an autoimmune reaction from it. Older people with slightly weaker immune systems weren't getting triggered, and so there was a slower death rate among older people. But it was absolutely catastrophic. This virus that we're dealing with right now doesn't cause such an aggressive response of the immune system. And we're not totally sure why that difference is, but it's fortunate. And actually, in this case, it's people with weaker immune systems that are dying of it, because it's staying in the lungs too long. It's killing too many lung cells. So when I say that a virus actually infects cells, it'll get inside of a cell. It reproduces in there, makes thousands of copies, and then they bud out of the cell. And they end up killing that cell after so long, because they're using up all of that cell's resources. And this is happening inside the lungs of patients that can't get rid of it fast enough. It's just their lung cells are just dying. And then you've also got the immune system, which is attacking as well. And the immune system is secreting liquids that it uses to help attack. You've got a fever, which the fever is actually not caused by the virus. The fever is a response the body does. Our immune system works better at a higher temperature. And so we raise our body temperature when we're sick, so the immune system can do more. And so it's a combination of side effects from the immune system, the immune system's attack, along with actual just cell death in the lungs that causes pneumonia. People can't get enough air. They can't get enough oxygen. They can't excrete enough CO2. And so their CO2 builds up in their blood. Their oxygen levels go down, and they end up eventually dying from that. But yeah, the big difference that we understand well between the flu and the coronavirus, there are actually lots of coronaviruses that infect humans. Most of them just cause really mild colds. The difference between the flu and a coronavirus is that the flu has multiple chromosomes, viral chromosomes. So they have lots of different sets of genes that are on different strands of RNA. And this allows the flu virus to evolve super fast, because if two versions of the flu virus infect one cell, their genes actually shuffle. They shuffle really, really easily. And so you can get rapid evolution of the flu virus. Whereas these coronaviruses, they only have one chromosome, and you can get genes to transfer from one version of the virus to another version of the virus, but it's a lot slower. And so coronaviruses evolve slow, um, which is good and bad. The good thing about it is that we can get a vaccine that should work for several years instead of having to get a new vaccine every year like we do with the flu. The disadvantage of it, though, is that respiratory infections usually evolve towards benign. They usually evolve to be more and more gentle as time goes on. So the flu was horrible the first year, but then, a few years later, it was super mild, as mild as it is today. And that happens because the flu, viruses are just evolving entities. All they're doing is reproducing, and evolution is pulling them to get better and better at surviving and reproducing. That's it. They're not trying to kill you. They're not actually your enemies. They're just trying to reproduce. And it's a really bad strategy if you're trying to reproduce to kill your host, because then you can't reproduce anymore. And what natural selection actually does is it pulls respiratory viruses, towards giving people just mild coughs. Because if you have a mild cough, you're going to still go hang out with your friends. You're going to pass it to them. You're not going to worry you won't even notice, really. You've got a little bit of a cough, and that's great for the virus. It's going to spread like crazy. If you're getting really sick, you're going to stay home. You're not going to pass it to your friends. And if you die, of course, you're dead. So the virus dies with you. So the nice thing about the flu, it evolves so quickly that it's constantly, as soon as we get a nasty strain of the flu, it quickly evolves to be friendlier. This virus might take a few more years to evolve that friendly lifestyle because it evolves slower.
So I guess it kind of helps and hurts at the
Right.
same time with it evolving so slow. Which that was actually going to be my next question: is where, how is this virus going to evolve in the future? And I guess that it's just a kind of a slow progression to being a friendlier, I guess, type of virus.
Right. Yeah. And there's two reasons that happens. I mean, one is that there's a selection event on humans. People who are really vulnerable to the disease will die, and they will not be around to get infected by it, later. So that's one reason that viruses become benign. But that's not the main thing that happens. The main thing that happens is that the virus actually evolves to be less harsh to its host. In the case of respiratory viruses, there are certain pathogens that actually natural selection pulls them to be more and more brutal to their host as time goes on. Respiratory illnesses are not like that because they depend on fairly close contact to be transmitted. And so they depend on you being healthy in order to be transmitted. That said, there is a slight chance that this virus could evolve to infect another type of tissue. Right now, it infects tissue in the lungs and the mouth and the nose. It could evolve to infect other types of tissues. And if that were to happen, it could evolve in a way that being deadlier would be in its benefit. And so, but that's highly unlikely. The most likely scenario is that this is going to follow the same route that the flu followed, and the same route that all the other coronaviruses that live in humans have followed. And that is that, 10 years from now, if you get COVID-19, you might not even notice. And if you do notice, you'll just have a mild cold.
So, do you think that the current estimates, like I think it was last night we heard that the current estimate for like a death toll is 100,000 or more. Do you think that it's going to get like that bad?
That's for the U.S., right?
I think so.
It's already killed. I don't know how many people it's already killed, but it's Uh, actually, so our governments have been trying not to cause panic, and so they've been giving every time someone gets behind the podium and gives one of these numbers, if it's a government official, if it's Mike Pence or Donald Trump or um, leaders anywhere else in the world, they're trying to use the lower numbers. So virologists will give us an estimate, and there's a high and there's a low, and actually the low number, I believe, just bumped up to 240,000 for the U.S. That's now the low number. Um, Mike Pence, and I'm really surprised that he said this because this is quite alarming. He said that we're following the same trajectory as Italy. Um, so that is not good. That is not good at all. I think as people take social distancing more seriously, that could be mitigated a little bit. And there's also a little bit of hope that as things warm up, as our climate warms up, it'll actually spread slower. And one of the reasons for these fatalities is not that the virus is killing people, but that the hospitals can't handle all the people coming in. So people are actually dying from illnesses that are perfectly treatable because there's not enough nurses, because there's not enough, especially because there's not enough just equipment to take care of people. There's not enough ventilators and so on. So because of that, it's very important that if you have symptoms, you call the hospital instead of going there because they're already overwhelmed. You call them, they will tell you what to do. Most people who get this do not need to go to the hospital. The vast majority don't get hospitalized at all. In Italy, it's been, of the people who show symptoms, because a lot of people get it and don't even have symptoms, but of the people who show symptoms, only about 20% end up actually going to the hospital to be monitored. And then a tiny percent of them actually go on a ventilator, and then a chunk of them recover and a chunk of them don't. So the most important thing is to, if you're sick, call the doctor. And some people are worried, well, maybe they won't take me as seriously over the phone, but they're turning people away at the door too. So if you call them and you're very clear about what your symptoms are, they'll be able to figure out whether or not you actually need to be monitored. And if you do, they'll have you come in. But the main problem with this virus is not that it's super nasty and deadly. It's that it's making people sick enough that they have to go to the hospital, and it's making so many people that sick that our system's getting overwhelmed because we are not prepared for this many people going to the hospital all at once. So
I mean, you say that only about 20% of the people that contract this will need to go to the hospital or should seek medical care. Is that right?
well, that's what we've seen in Italy. So 20% of the people who have symptoms and are worried, only about 20% end up actually being hospitalized. So it is pretty low. And then, the actual death rate of this, we think, is going to be around 1% or possibly less. So especially if you're young and healthy, you don't have much to worry about. People with extreme obesity, people who are longtime smokers, people who have heart disease or lung disease do need to be careful because this is it affects your lungs. It reduces your lungs' ability to exchange gases. And if you have underlying conditions like obesity or lung disease or heart disease that are also problematic for getting oxygen to all the parts of your body, then this disease is more dangerous for you. But a lot of people just simply don't need to go to the hospital. They don't need to be hospitalized. Their chances of having a catastrophic failure are almost zero. So there's just no need for them to go clog the system, right?
Well, yeah, but I guess I was more or less reflecting on the fact that our system, like our healthcare system, can't handle even 20%, or what it seems like. Whatever rate that it ends up being here in the U.S., we seem to be woefully unprepared for this.
Yeah, and everybody is. I mean, we're clearing out buildings and putting up hospital beds all over the place. China did this too. I don't know if you saw them build this giant hospital in Wuhan, like right as soon as this broke out. But still, they still weren't prepared. They seem to have been more prepared than Italy, but it's also kind of hard to judge, trying to like to put on a show too. So they're they they work a lot harder than Italy does to groom their image, their international image. So we're seeing in Italy that it's like, yeah, it's insane. I mean, people are just filling the hallways at hospitals. People, they're in school gyms and they're just cots next to each other, just hundreds of people in cots next to each other, and there's no barrier between them, which that's really bad. If you see how it's people are setting up these makeshift hospitals in the US, they're putting physical barriers between each bed, which is super good idea, because not only does it matter whether or not you get infected, it matters how many times you get infected at once. If you have one cell that's infected and that's your starting point, that cell has to grow a bunch of viruses, then they will leak into other cells and you'll get a slow growth of the virus. But if you have everyone around you is coughing on you while you're already dealing with it, they're giving you more viruses, you're giving them more viruses, and it's a race between your immune system and the virus. Like, how many viruses are there and how many immune cells do you have fighting them? And so the fewer virus particles you have to begin with, the better off you are.
Okay. Earlier, you listed a number of groups that are more likely to be affected. Would because I'm a diabetic and I've got a few people that are diabetic in my viewer base. Are diabetics like also in that group of being more susceptible, it being more deadly for them?
I haven't seen data on diabetes, but I would imagine that any underlying condition. I mean, diabetes is it causes a lot of complex issues with the blood. So if you are diabetic, I would be extra careful with this. Just make sure not to get it, or if you do get it, make sure you don't get it until later when we have better treatments. Because right now our treatment is basically just put them on a ventilator if they need it. And the ventilators, all it does is it pushes more oxygen into your lungs so that you don't have to do it yourself. And so that it can increase that gas exchange. So yeah, if you have any health conditions, you should be extra cautious, and let your friends know that you need to be extra cautious and they need to be extra cautious around you. This virus is still so new that we don't have large scale data on many things. Uh, I I do seem to recall having heard diabetes as being a possible issue for this, but yeah,
Okay.
the older you are, the more dangerous this is. The more underlying health conditions, the more dangerous this is. I mean, the more pills that you have to take on a daily basis, the more likely something like this can be really dangerous for you. So,
Right. Right. So let's get into a little bit, I guess, the crazier part of this, and that's the
oh yeah,
conspiracy theories.
yeah.
Because I know with your video getting so popular, you said that you had like almost every single conspiracy theory out there come through your way. I'm wondering which ones were the most interesting to read or the most ridiculous.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of them. So basically, we have the starting point where nowadays, because there's so much genetic modification technology available, as I mentioned earlier, anytime a virus breaks out, people immediately suspect that it was a bioweapon or it was a lab leak. And those are legitimate concerns. I mean, our military is very concerned about that every time there's a new virus. Um, Laboratories around the world are very concerned about that, because if there was a lab leak, people want to know how it happened. We have these what are called level 4 biosafety laboratories that are the most secure. And if we find that there's something we're doing there that's not secure enough, the whole world needs to change that. So this is these two possibilities, that it's a lab leak or that it's a bioweapon, those are very real possibilities that were looked into very deeply early on with this. And from that sprung a million conspiracy theories. Like, the one of the interesting things about these conspiracy theories is that people have certainty that they know how it happened. As the scientific community is saying, we're fairly certain this came from a natural evolution event. in the meat market in China. They say, we're fairly certain. Well, these conspiracy theorists say, no, I know that it came from this. And it's that kind of imbalance in perceived certainty that causes these things to spread. But I could read you, I've got 30 comments that were so funny I had to copy and paste them into a document here. And I could read through all 30 of them, or I could just maybe let me just pick like 5 of them here.
Okay, I was gonna say I love conspiracy theory type stuff. So any number that you want to read through, feel free.
Okay, so one commenter says the virus came from leftist commie Democrats who hated Trump's successful economy and tried everything from a coup to impeachment to get rid of President Trump. Nothing worked, so they allowed the virus to fly its way through the world. But once again, God and Trump will have the last laugh on their evil intentions. So this guy is blaming the Democrats. It's not clear here if he thinks they actually built it and unleashed it. He says they allowed the virus to fly through the world. It's kind of interesting. Another guy said,
Uh-oh.
say
Oh,
hello to the New World Order. The eugenicists are going to kill us all. So this guy thinks it was Bill Gates attacking China.
oh.
And
Well, I was gonna ask. My internet froze up there for a second. Is there any way that you could read that one again?
oh yeah. So this is a version of the Bill Gates conspiracy, and I want to talk about why people are blaming Bill Gates for this in a second here, because it's actually kind of funny. But so this one says that Bill Gates funded the company that owns the coronavirus patent. It was created in a U.S. laboratory and released on the public enemy number one, China. Say hello to the New World Order in action. The eugenicists are going to kill us all. So this guy thinks that it came from Bill Gates, who wanted to attack China.
Oh wow.
And a lot of people are blaming Bill Gates. That's probably the most common conspiracy theory that I find. Well, the most common is that I hear is that it came from U.S. So if it's someone from Asia commenting, they'll say it came from the U.S. and it's a bioweapon. And if it's an American, they say that it came from China and it's a bioweapon. So those are the two most common conspiracies: it's a bioweapon from the U.S. or China. But the next in line is the Bill Gates. And the reason for this is that the Bill Gates Foundation has been very concerned about viruses for a long time. So they put on these mock virus outbreaks with government leaders. You can watch them on YouTube. And they'll say, oh, a coronavirus is spreading. People don't know that coronaviruses are common. There's lots of them. And they don't know that scientists have been worried about a coronavirus jumping from animals to people and causing devastation for a long time. So they think, for a lot of people, the first time they ever heard of a coronavirus was just now, right? During this outbreak. So they're like, what? Bill Gates was planning this? They see this video and it looks like he was planning it. To add juice to the conspiracy, Bill Gates has funded a lot of vaccine research for the meat industry, because the meat industry is where viruses jump from animals to humans. And the meat industry is also it gets devastated by viruses from time to time. So turkeys and chickens get viruses that'll wipe them out. And coronaviruses are the most common thing that affects poultry. And not the same type of coronavirus that we're dealing with, very different species of coronavirus. But so he has, one of his companies that he funds has a patent for it's called an attenuated chicken coronavirus. There's a coronavirus that's been infecting chickens. Engineers took it and essentially they neutered it so that it can infect a cell if it's put directly into those cells, but it can't spread. And that's a precursor to a vaccine for this chicken virus. And the goal here was to eventually make a vaccine for chickens and turkeys so that we could vaccinate them so they wouldn't get sick. But people see the word coronavirus and Bill Gates and patent in the same thing, and they think Bill Gates has a patent on the coronavirus that's killing humans right now. And so those things all combined have caused this Bill Gates conspiracy theory. So
Well, yeah, and actually, I've seen a number of posts where people are telling Bill Gates that he needs to sit out of this because they don't want somebody that is like a computer geek to like be in control of the or to take advice from a computer geek is basically what they say. And they don't really know about his philanthropic antiviral
Yeah,
type of work that he does. Um,
yeah. I mean, that kind of comes down to just the fear that's legitimate. There's a legitimate fear if any person or organization has too much power, that's a problem. And obviously, a billionaire is so powerful that they can buy a reputation. They can they can do whatever they want, and that's definitely scary. It's scary to have individuals walking around that have that much power. So I understand that fear, but uh, you don't necessarily want even someone with good intentions to be controlling how everything runs, right? You want a lot of in general, you want medium-sized to small-sized competing groups that are dealing with a problem. You want them to be cooperating with each other, but also kind of competing, trying different things out. So yeah, I mean, there always is. I like to think of conspiracy theories as just kind of poorly proposed hypotheses that should be tested and should be considered a little bit, right? I
mhm.
mean, they're not. There are valid concerns, but they're the thing that really just gets me is how certain they are. I mean, this guy is certain that this was Bill Gates, not just Bill Gates, but he did it. He doesn't even. Not only does he know who did it, he knows why he did it. Bill Gates wanted to attack China, and I just don't see how anyone could find that much certainty in there's just not data there to back that up. There's another one here that's really good, which is a very different conspiracy theory, and that is the guy says one word, 5G. I don't know if you can consider 5G to really be one word, but um,
Yeah,
the
I've seen
5G,
that.
yeah, 5G is the new cell phone towers. It's fifth generation is what it stands for. And these cell phone towers use a higher form of radiation. And that word radiation is super scary because we think of nuclear radiation, but this is electromagnetic radiation that's in a frequency that cannot cause chemical reactions. So the radiation that you get from like a nuclear blast that can cause chemical reactions, and that's why it's so destructive to humans. But there is a bunch of different conspiracies surrounding this 5G thing. Some say that it like misaligns your chakras, and then you get sick because of that. Um, and chakra, that's like a Eastern medicine term that doesn't really Western science doesn't recognize that as a thing that actually exists. But the we've done experiments with this type of radiation to see if it does affect organisms, and we don't have the data suggests that it does not. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be concerned about it. I mean, it is a new thing. It's a new level of radiation of that's being transmitted consistently. It is a new thing, and every time we're trying something new for the first time, everyone should be a little bit cautious of it. So it's good that people are watching out and paying attention to this. But yeah, the conspiracy theory that it caused a virus, that some think that it created the virus somehow. Others think that it weakened our bodies so we could be more susceptible to the virus. There's a lot of conspiracies around that, but there's no evidence at this point that sort of radiation has any effect on our immune systems. But again, it's good that someone's worrying about that, right? Someone's keeping that in the forefront of the world's mind.
Yeah, the
But yeah,
conspiracy theory I heard on 5G with the coronavirus is that it like the coronavirus doesn't necessarily exist.
yeah,
That it's
yeah, yeah,
actually 5G that is causing all of this is what I heard, and it's just it's so ridiculous the lengths that they'll go to because what they do is they take that nugget of truth and then they
yeah,
extrapolate from that with
yeah.
illogical and unsupported conclusions, and
Right.
it usually fits some kind of narrative they're looking to push, and it usually revolves around like trust, like the fact that you got to trust like the officials or the medical doctors or the scientists. Like you've got to trust these other people. They want to be able to throw on a lab coat and like look through a either a telescope or a microscope and be able to get the answers, and they just don't understand that you've got to be specially trained in order to understand the information when it's put in front of you.
Right, right. Yeah, it's very the there are a lot of ideas. So if you look at medicine earlier on, there was a lot of different ideas about what causes disease. I mean, everything from demons to stinky air and so on. And a lot of those ideas still persisted. I mean, when we found microbes and we discovered how they reproduce and all this, not everybody accepted it, right? It's only recently that we've been able to see viruses. It's like the 1930s, I think, whenever it was that we invented the electron microscope and we're finally able to see viruses. But before that, I mean, there were just these mysterious illnesses. Like we couldn't see them under a microscope because viruses are too small to see with a normal optical microscope. They're smaller than the wavelength of light, so you literally cannot see them with light. You have to use electron microscope or scanning tunneling microscopes to see them. So this really was a long fought battle to figure out what the heck these are. And there was all sorts of ideas, and all these hypotheses were, they were the best we had at the time. And within Eastern medicine, there was different ideas that viruses are, I think I shouldn't just say Eastern medicine, that's way too broad, but in some medical cultures, viruses were the release of toxins. So your body has these toxins and it's just releasing them. And it's trying to purge them, and you get sick during that purge. So a lot of these ideas are still held by different cultural groups, and that just haven't fully subscribed to mainstream science. And so, yeah, that's what we're seeing. I mean, I think it's a little bit hard to understand for a lot of people in the West, in American cultures. I think that the closest thing would be the creation evolution debate. The creationists have their own science, what they call science, for how things evolve and so on. And they've done that because they wanted something that meshed with their religious beliefs. And they felt like evolution did not mesh with their religious beliefs. So they've invented this creation science, is what they call it. But you have very similar things in other traditions where they're trying to maintain something sacred about their tradition, and so they refuse to accept viruses or other things. So there really are a lot of ideas aside from the mainstream understanding of how viruses work.
Okay. Which were there any other comments that you wanted to mention real quick?
Well, let me just I made a list of all the people who are accused. So
I can't wait to hear this.
So this is a short list I can just rattle off here. So China, communists, Donald Trump, the Democrats, Chinese, Bill Gates, Koreans, the Jews, the Georgians, the elitists, the Republicans, Allah, aliens, 5G, God, Satanists, Satan, melted glaciers, one percenters, and big pharma. Those are the
Well, yeah. So the one percenters, I'm really kind of curious about, because it kind of seems like the one percenters wouldn't want to release something that would kill them, because it seems like the one percenters would be the old white people.
Well, the idea there is that if you can engineer a virus, you can also engineer the vaccine ahead of time. So you wouldn't release it until you have the cure. So that's
okay.
I mean, that would be a legitimate way to do something, right? So that's why people are scared of this. I mean, you really do have, once you gain a certain amount of wealth, you really do have the ability to do some pretty nasty things if you wanted to, and those types of decisions are not made publicly. So again, there are legitimate reasons to be concerned about stuff like this, but in this instance, we don't see any evidence of foul play. And
well,
so, yeah.
The biggest distinction that I've really noticed in this is the difference in like just the how tiered the classes are. Because like, just for instance, you had Rand Paul, who just got tested, was asymptomatic and everything, but he got tested just because he was around somebody that was in contact with somebody else that had it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But then if you go over to New York, then you've got people that are dying and then being tested, and they have, like, they test positive for the coronavirus. So it kind of seems
Yeah.
like there's this big gap between, like, the upper class and the middle and lower classes, as far as
Yeah.
being tested and being cared for.
Yeah. I don't. So, yeah. I mean, there are ways. I think it has more to do with connections than wealth, though, because you can't just buy a test. Um, I mean, I suppose you could just bribe someone, right? But
Mhm.
like my family works in my brother does manufacturing in China, and I could get a test if I wanted to from China really easily. It would be super cheap for me. The government officials, I think kind of the argument that they're giving is that we are essential workers just like nurses and doctors. So nurses and doctors can get them super easily too, because they're considered essential workers, and we definitely want to know if they're sick or not, because they're going to be dealing with patients. So if they do have it, we want to take them out of normal medical practice and put them so they're only working with other people that have the disease until they're too sick to work themselves. So they have perfect access to it. And I think the argument for politicians is that they have to keep meeting. For a while, they were trying to keep meeting personally because they're dealing with this crisis. So they were considered I think they considered themselves first responders, but that's definitely arguable as to whether or not they should be considered first responders, because anything he does, he could do from Skype at home, like his, you know. So yeah, that does seem a little bit unfair. In his case. But again, like I said, if you have the right connections, you could get a test right now. It's illegal for China to send them here, so you'd have to
Mhm.
have a friend who's willing to break the law in China. Um,
Right.
but you know,
Well, there are a few questions from the audience
yeah.
that they wanted to ask you, but I was gonna say, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about before we get to the questions?
I think we've covered things pretty well. I'm curious to see what questions people have.
Yeah. Yeah, they've been pretty good ones. So the first one I have is there an estimate of a time span for the virus to mutate enough so that immune persons to the original virus are susceptible again? And this is an interesting question, because I did hear about how over in, I believe it was in Wuhan, uh, people that had tested negative for it after having it are coming back testing positive. So I'm kind
Right.
of, it's a small amount, but it's still
Right.
happening.
Yeah. The tiny fraction of people that's happening to, it just seems like a statistical anomaly. So what's most likely happening, and there's a bunch of things that could be happening there. I mean, it is possible that they got it twice, but that's super unlikely, because the virus the virus has not mutated hardly at all. The maximum deviation right now is 11 point mutations, which is almost nothing. Uh, so for the virus, so most of the viruses are nearly identical to the original one, and once your adaptive immune system can kill a virus, it can kill a virus for a long time. And that virus would have to mutate dramatically for you not to be able to kill it again. And what we think is happening in those cases is that someone was tested, they were tested again, and it came out negative. It's as they're recovering, so you keep getting tested until you're safe enough to go home. And they test you by scraping the back of your throat or the back inside of your nose with this swab, and then they do PCR, which is a process that helps them see if there's any virus genes in that swab sample. And you can swab wrong and just not catch the virus. The other thing that happened, so maybe the second test was just they swabbed wrong. They got a bunch of snot on there and they didn't get any viruses in that one. The other thing that could happen is that they were starting to recover, and your immune system, I mean, I'm sure you've had this where you gotten sick and you start to feel better and then you get sick again because you went out and started being too active too soon. There are tons of things that can interrupt your immune system. So you can be winning the battle and then start to lose it again. So it might have been that his viral count was so low for a while that they didn't catch any in the swab. Then when they swabbed again, they caught some. So there's a lot of reasons why that would happen that have nothing to do with getting reinfected. And those cases are almost zero. Like I think there's like 10 cases of that out of thousands and thousands of people that have been having these tests done. So we should not be scared that you can get reinfected. If your immune system is faulty, maybe, but it's going to be a crazy anomaly to get reinfected right away. We think that because this virus evolves so slow, when we look at other coronaviruses, once you've had one of them, you are immune to it for between 1 to 10 years. And so we think it's going to be the same here. This virus is behaving, it's evolving at a similar rate as those other coronaviruses. And what happens there is there's two ways you can lose immunity. Your adaptive immunity can actually just, atrophy, and you don't have that. It's memory. It forgets what that pathogen looks like. And then the other way that you can lose immunity is that the virus evolves to a point that your immune system no longer recognizes it. So it has to relearn that this is a bad thing when it infects your cells. And yeah, like I said, the estimates right now based on other coronaviruses in humans is between 1 and 10-year immunity. So you're definitely, well, we think that you are safe once you've gotten through this. You're safe to go help others. So
Are you still likely, like, of course, I'm wondering what is the time frame after that you've had it? Are you still susceptible to like spread it to other people?
that is fairly unclear, but what they're doing is they're waiting until most of the hospitals, every hospital is different, but most hospitals are keeping you in the hospital or telling you that you have to keep yourself quarantined until you test negative and until you've had your fever down low for a certain amount of time. But you you're contagious a little bit before symptoms start, and you're contagious a little bit after symptoms end. But you're a lot less contagious. So during the height of the symptoms, when you're coughing all the time, when these viruses are really having a party inside of you, you're shedding a lot of viruses, and you're very contagious. Before and after, it goes down quite dramatically. So we think, I don't know what the length is, but if you do get sick, your doctor will tell you how long you need to wait. So yeah, and that is a bit of information that's changing as time goes on. It might be way less than we're telling people right now. Might be more. So yeah, I would say listen to your doctor on that.
Yeah. Considering that though, the fact that you'll be good for like anywhere between 1 and 10 years after you get it. What do you think about these so-called coronavirus parties that people have been doing? Have you heard about those?
Is that before they get sick or after?
Before, I mean, it's the same concept as like a chickenpox party, where like one kid gets chickenpox and so they infect other people so that they get immune to it. I mean, it seems like that would be a bad idea to do.
Well, I mean, it is a bad idea because, I mean, ideally you just won't get it. Ideally, we'd stomp this whole thing out and you wouldn't get it. I don't recommend doing that, and the CDC does not want people doing that. But that is what we used to do before we had vaccines. That is what people used to do for smallpox, for example. You're really good at fighting it when you're young, and you're really bad at fighting it when you're old. So kids would be purposely infected with smallpox. And that's what we did before we had vaccines. And we are in another situation where we don't have a vaccine. So, I mean, if you're in a country that decides that as a group, that's what everyone's going to do, it's not catastrophically stupid, but it's not the method that we've decided to go with here. And so it's actually very counterproductive to do it here because we are trying to slow the infection rate. And if you purposely speed it up, you are fighting against the rest of your community. So I do not recommend doing that unless you are told to by your government leaders. And even then, it is pretty sketchy. It's dangerous. I mean, your best bet is just to not get it, especially if you have underlying health conditions. So
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I don't think people should be having coronavirus parties.
no.
um so another question is asking you, John, have you heard the theory that certain blood types are at higher risk to get and die from the virus? So are you more susceptible
Yeah.
depending on your blood type?
Yes, I have heard that. There's a paper written about that. There seems to be a correlation with blood type and severity of disease. And I can't I don't I, I haven't I didn't actually read it, but my wife is a nurse, and she was mentioning that too. She was asking what my blood type was, and she's one of the unsusceptible ones. I'm one of the slightly less susceptible ones. But I did look at I didn't read the full paper. I read the the overview of the paper, and it seemed like the correlation's super weak. So it seems like there's a correlation there, but it's not super strong. So I wouldn't worry about that. Um, I mean, men are there's a much stronger correlation between dying of this and being a man. So it's affecting men a lot more than it's affecting women. That we know. Um, it's
Damn.
affecting older people more than younger people, and it's
Yeah.
affecting smokers and so on. So
I was gonna say damn Y chromosome.
yeah. We don't know why it is. We think maybe it's because men don't pay attention to their health as much. Maybe it's because just culturally, and maybe it's because there's something with testosterone or other hormones that are causing a difference in immune response. We don't know. Yeah.
So another question that was asked is, why do you think that we keep getting? This is coming from the commenter. We keep getting some kind of pandemic every 100 years. We had the 1918 Spanish flu. In 1820 there was cholera. In 1720 it was the Black Plague. Why are they 100 years apart? I th-
Well, yeah, they're not. It's. I mean, the last pandemic was 2009. So
right.
that was the swine flu. It just kind of depends on how big you want to consider something to be a catastrophic pandemic. Actually, epidemiologists look at this one and are like, this is nothing compared to the Spanish flu. This is nothing compared to the earlier pandemics. This is a walk in the park. So they're actually the people who are really concerned about pandemics are like, thank goodness, this is almost like a dress rehearsal of how mild this is compared to how bad it could be. I mean, we could get a pandemic that wipes out 40% of the population. That's the type of pandemic that we're worried about. We're really worried about. And they're actually grateful that we're having this one that's killing. They're not grateful that it's killing people, but they're grateful that it's causing enough of a scare that we're learning how to do this, and we're learning for the first time how this is going to work in a society that's connected with airplanes and everything else. So there's going to be a lot of good lessons learned here. But why is it that it's 100 years? I think it's just I think that's kind of just a pattern that's not necessarily real. It's uh, a pandemic is an unlikely event, but unlikely events do happen, and when you have large populations. So yeah, it's
Well, yeah, I was gonna say the 100 year, like any kind of like time frame like that that seems awkward or whatnot. I would say probably 9 times out of 10 you're just looking at like I guess confirmation bias, or like you're just looking at very specific instances that are 100 years apart, when in actuality there's there's different things that happen in between there that break up that. It's just hyper focused on setting that narrative. So whenever I see
Right.
something like that, I'm automatically like, huh, is it really, like, is that
Yeah.
really like the time span kind of thing? So I think
Yeah.
having a healthy skepticism about that kind of information is a good idea.
Yeah.
um
Well, the other thing to add to that is that we do suspect that pandemics will be more common in the future because our population keeps growing. We're consuming more animals than we ever have in the past, dramatically more. So the wealthier that the world gets in general, the more animals we eat, which means the more animals we come in contact with on a regular basis. So a lot of places that were usually like, largely vegetarian due to poverty are now eating lots of chicken and pork and stuff. And so that just more people are interacting with animals. And then you've got the flights that are happening. So you've got population plus meat consumption plus flights, international flights. Like these three things exploding at the same time are that's a recipe for disaster. you know.
yeah. Now, in light of that, though, do you think the production of synthetic meat would help, like, prevent any kind of future pandemic?
I don't know. I was talking about that with my friend Tim Blay, who's another YouTuber. Um, he was saying that would, and I'm saying no, because you've got a bunch of meat, you got a bunch of cell cultures that don't have an immune system to fight off diseases. You could easily get viruses that are spreading through those cell cultures. I mean, viruses attack cells. They don't care if you have legs. they're attacking cells. But of course, a meat culture can't sneeze, so that's good. So it would have to find a different way to be transmitted, and it's also quite possible that something that evolves in a cell culture won't be very good at transmitting from one person to another because we behave so much different than clumps of cells in a petri dish.
Mhm.
So it's kind of up in the air. It's kind of up in the air. That definitely something that they need to worry about when they're doing this is how do we stop diseases from spreading? But maybe just naturally it'll be better. Oh, time will tell, right?
Yeah, yeah. All right. So next question is, what would you like to see as the next step to progress in resolving the pandemic, or what kind of roadmap do you see us taking to the best possible conclusion for this?
The best possible conclusion would be getting a vaccine that is proven to be safe for the general population. Unfortunately, that takes several years usually. Um, the brand new vaccines really are dangerous. We don't, before. So the vaccine is what you do basically is you inject uh, either a neutered version of the virus or parts of the virus into the population, and that's a lot safer than everybody just getting sick. So everybody going to these virus parties that you were talking about earlier. That's a lot safer than that. Even worst case scenario, most dangerous vaccines possible. They're way better than the actual virus, right? But the every time your immune system gets triggered, there's a slight chance of an autoimmune disorder. So things like Guillain-Barré and things like that. And in the past, we've had vaccines that have caused enough Guillain-Barré that we've stopped them. Um, and every time you get a new vaccine, you have to juggle like what's the cost benefit analysis here. But that's why it takes so long to say that this is safe, because we have to test it on a lot of people and make sure that there's not certain population groups that are susceptible to a side effect that's just not acceptable. Um, but yeah, the best bet is to get that vaccine that's safe and give it to everybody who's willing to take it, and those who aren't willing to take it will have to just get the virus. Uh, if they ever come in contact with it. And yeah, that'll be the best solution, because I think this virus really could still be dangerous. 5 years from now, it might have already become so benign that we don't care about it. But 5 years from now, it might still be dangerous enough to be causing trouble.
Mhm.
So Yeah.
Well, do you think that the social distancing and like pretty much what it seems like to be shutting down the economy, do you think that's going to help flatten the curve? That they're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. We know that it's helping. It's just obviously it's not sustainable, right? Like
Right.
if this keeps coming back, if this comes back next year this strong, uh, we're not going to want to do this again. Or we're going to want to have something smarter than this because we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. Like all of the all of the problems that come with it seems weird to want to save the economy at the expense of lives, but a collapsed economy causes death. I mean, it causes suicides. It causes people when the hospital's overwhelmed. If you have a normal heart problem that you could otherwise get helped with, you can't because the hospital's full. So the economy collapsing and the hospitals being overwhelmed that ruins that actually kills people. So a couple things will be better next year. For one, we'll have a lot more hospital staff, right? We'll be more ready for this as far as we'll have buildings set aside for it and so on. Uh, but yeah, I don't see how this could be sustained for another season. I think this will probably last through the summer, or at least partially last through the summer. I'm not sure when we'll be able to end social distancing, but people are at least going to be scared to interact with each other for quite a while. I think it's gonna be a while before everyone's comfortable just going to a movie in the theater, right?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, we need to get that vaccine quick so that we can just be done with this and move on. That's our best bet.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. Somebody asked this question. I think it was kind of in jest, asking what's the best vaccine against conspiracy theories. And I mean, I would just say critical thought would be a good thing to do. But I mean, what do you think?
Yeah, I would say the best vaccine is to spend like an hour on the CDC website. The Center for Disease Control exists to help educate the public on this stuff when it happens. I mean, they're doing the research on the virus. The information on their website has been vetted. Now they're going to be slower at publishing new information than maybe your friends on Twitter might be, because they have to actually be very careful and vet all that information. But know what they're saying, know what the official story is, so that when something that conflicts with the official story comes across your news feed or your Twitter feed, you know to be cautious. I mean, just because it conflicts with the mainstream with the official story doesn't mean it's false, but uh, you'll know to be alert. Like, okay, something weird's happening here, and you can just kind of move on from there. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. No, I think that's really good advice. So, somebody asked, do you think that the decline of the quote unquote professional has given rise to people second guessing medical professionals?
Yeah, there seems to be like a anti-expert movement, right? Um, and yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of reasons for that to have been happening, but right now we're seeing a really big jump back into realizing how important experts are. I was like most people, I was terrified to hear that Mike Pence was going to be in charge of America's coronavirus response because he believes that the Earth is 6,000 years old. He's as anti-science as you could get, right? But I was immediately super relieved to hear him he was listening to the CDC's scientists. He was having them come on stage with him. He actually put together a good team of researchers, and he listened to them. And when Mike Pence is on stage saying, "Let's listen to our scientists and let's look at the models that they've produced, their projections," that's amazing. That's like this virus might really help turn us away from that rejection of experts that we'd been suffering from for a while. So yeah, to response, yeah, I think that the rejection of experts has been a problem here.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and this plays into another question that we got, which we'll ask here in a second. But um, so the next question is, which does John think would be more efficient, widespread testing or specialized testing for the most at-risk groups?
Well, hmm, that's a good question. We need to get to a point. So for the recovery of our economy, widespread testing is the most important. For the immediate saving of lives, testing people who are most at risk is most important. So if we can do both, that's ideal. But what we can actually do is we can prioritize testing for people that are sick, and then have a small sample of tests that are being used for random sampling. So you don't actually have to test everybody in the population to figure out how widespread a disease is. You can do random sampling. So you just throw darts at a board and figure out who you're going to test, and you can do that with very few actual tests, and you can get a pretty accurate picture of how widespread a virus is in a particular community doing that. So um, that is what we're trying to do now, because right now we've been so behind that every test available is going to sick people. We're trying to make sure that they actually have what we think they have. Because I mean, how horrible would it be to be, you're 65 years old, you're healthy, but you get a flu, and you think it's this new virus. You go to the hospital, they put you in a bed next to someone else who has it, and now you got the flu and the coronavirus. You
Mhm.
know, we need to test people and treat them properly, uh, instead of assuming everybody has it and putting them in the lion's den.
Yeah. So yeah, final question that we have is, how detrimental do you think that the anti-vax movement will have on this pandemic?
That's not super clear. I haven't heard a lot of anti-vaxxers. I would say that I probably had like 10 of them in my comments, over thousands of comments on that video. Uh, and so I'm not super clear. I think that this infection is reminding us like what vaccines are for. Um, the anti-vax movement was able to start in America because we haven't dealt with a nasty virus in so long. Like, we haven't seen kids die of polio. Uh, Everybody was all behind vaccines when their kids were dying of polio. There was no anti-vax moms, or very few. Um, and so I think that this scare is going to hopefully help kill the anti-vax movement. It won't totally kill it, but will really help to shrink it. Um, and yeah, I mean, we'll see. We'll have a vaccine here, and hopefully within a year or two, and we'll see if people take it or not. I'm really curious.
Yeah, and then before we head out, which I want to say thank you so much, John, for coming on and
It's
talking
been
about
fun.
this. Yeah, it's been really great. I've enjoyed this conversation. We've had some really great comments. But I'm kind of curious. Do you think that there's likely to be a resurgence like of this in the fall? Because that was another thing that's been put out there, is that there's likely to be another wave coming in the fall. Do you think that's likely?
Well, to say that there's going to be another wave in the fall would be saying that we think that summer is going to slow the spread, and then when it gets cold again, it'll speed up again. We don't yet know if its spread will slow in the summer. And if it does, that's good news. It'll give us time to like work through the cases that are currently. It's better to have two spikes than one if that two spikes are spread out, right? So if it really is just one group that's spread out in two humps instead of one giant hump. So this virus probably will, well, it's kind of up in the air right now as to whether or not it'll slow down in the summer. We hope that it will. There's a little bit of physics with the way that these water droplets that you cough out that have the viruses in them. Uh, when the air is cold, the air is also usually dry, extra dry, because cold air can't hold moisture very well. And so when you cough these droplets out, water molecules will evaporate out of the droplet, but there's not enough water molecules in the air to make the droplet grow bigger. So the droplets tend to shrink when it's cold, which is a little bit counterintuitive. You think that they'd shrink when it's hot, but they shrink, and because of that, as they're shrinking, they get to stay in the air a little bit longer because they're lighter, and so they transmit just a little bit further. And just a little bit further means, when you magnify that over an entire population, that ends up being a huge spike in infections. So we think that as the air gets warmer and more humid, it'll cause those little droplets to actually grow when they're coughed out, and they'll hit the ground faster and be out of the air. So you can't infect people by breathing. That's the hope. And that is what happens with the flu. And that is what happens with other coronaviruses. So we suspect it might happen here, but we don't know. I mean, the virus is spreading like crazy, even in Ecuador, tropical places. So we don't know, but we actually do hope that it calms down in the summer. But if it does calm down in the summer, that means it's going to go back up in the fall. And that'll cause a scare. People who don't understand that what we actually got was a break instead of a second infection.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, like, for instance, during all this time, it's kind of been the summer time for like Australia and the southern hemisphere.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's still spreading there. So I guess that's not a very good sign, huh?
Well, it is still spreading, but there is evidence that it's spreading slower in those countries.
Okay.
Slightly slower. And, we see a huge thing. Like, most of us only get the cold in the wintertime. A lot of colds are caused by coronaviruses. So a lot of times we only get coronaviruses in the wintertime, but they're actually there all the time. It's just that they have a slight advantage in cold air and dry air. And, some parts of Australia, by the way, are so dry that what I'm telling you about summer here wouldn't actually work there. In super dry environments, it doesn't. The temperature is not what's important, really. It's the humidity that's important. So it is spreading in Ecuador. I spend every year I go to Ecuador. I don't know if I'll be able to go this next year, but the culture there is a lot more close. Like, you'll go to a small town and it feels like you're like in downtown LA because everyone's so close together. It's just their culture. And so I think that might be, and that's actually typical in a lot of tropical cultures. So maybe that's why it's spreading so fast, even in tropical cultures. It's just time will tell. Hopefully we get a break, but I don't know if we will.
Okay. Well, I hope that everybody has really enjoyed this discussion. Jon, again, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about, the coronavirus that we're all going through right now. And I really hope that people keep up the social distancing and you knock it off with the coronavirus parties. But everybody, if you know somebody that would love to know this kind of information, please share this video with them. Smash the like before you head on out. And of course, before you leave YouTube or whatever, go over to Jon's channel, Stated Clearly. You also have a channel called Stated Casually where you talk about some other topics, but you've got some really great content. I highly recommend your content. I've used it in referencing, some of my anti-creationist videos. So definitely everybody go check out Jon's channel, watch some of his videos, especially the one on the coronavirus. It was awesome. Y'all go check it out. And I guess we'll speak to you heathens later. Anything that you want to say before we head out, Jon?
No, just, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Everybody have a nice night. Wash your damn hands, and we'll see you heathens later.
All right.